correcting the Pope on Catholic theology is a little like going into the woods and saying, excuse me, Mr. Bear, do you really think this is the appropriate place for you to be pooping? Really? Who's going to clean that up? If you don't know, and you may not, just war is a Catholic doctrine that goes all the way back to the Church Fathers, St. Ambrose and St. Augustine. And there are many criteria, including it must be in self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. Only then can the war be said to have just cause, as opposed to Trump, who appears to have taken us to war just 'cause.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the weekend's rumpled romance look to our midweek well-ironed pantsuit. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. How are you, Alex?
I'm all right. More importantly, how are you? You've had a busy one, haven't you?
I have, and I hope we're going to be able to talk about it on today's show. But yeah.
We are. You couldn't escape it if you wanted to. But it's been logistically busy as well, I imagine, trying to organize the Friday presser, being in Brussels the day before. So you must feel exhausted. Do you have anything nice planned?
I am very exhausted, but this weekend is my mum's birthday, so I'm going to take her to see...
happy birthday, Mum.
Yeah, we're going to go and see Witness for the Prosecution at the theatre, which everybody says is great fun.
Have you seen the film before?
Nope.
Either of them or the novel?
Nope,
Okay, so you genuinely know nothing about it?
I know very little. I've tried to not. Yeah.
Good. Stay away. I can't wait for you to tell me what you all thought. Now, and usually, let us start with what we are not talking about this weekend.
Fucking Peter Mandelson.
Yeah, we're not talking about the Mandelson stuff. Not that it's not important. It really is very important. But we had a chat about it, and I don't know that we can add much other than I believe what X is saying, therefore this is terrible, or I believe what Y is saying, therefore this is terrible.
Exactly, yeah.
So in a way, I think it's the sort of story that we have to let brew a little bit, and it will either gather pace and undo, finally, Starmer, or it won't.
Indeed, and we may have to jump back on and re-record all of this. All I will say is I do not believe for one moment a civil servant of the seniority and caliber of Ollie Robbins would have acted unilaterally and without the permission of either the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister. I don't believe he is the type of person who would have taken Morgan McSweeney at his word.
My experience of the civil service, I agree. But at the same time, I think Robbins' position is really weakened by the fact that he gave evidence to Emily Thornberry's Foreign Affairs Committee a few months ago and said that Mandelson passed all the vetting and didn't mention anything about any contrary advice. So I don't know how this will go. It feels to me like it's of a piece like the George Robertson intervention, like there is briefing going on. The leadership challenges are definitely on maneuvers, aren't they?
Yep, but there is only really one campaign that is ready, which is the Wes Streeting campaign, I'm told. That they are the ones that have got their act together, their money together, their MPs together. They are well ahead of any of the other potential leadership candidates. So
yes, so it probably would be of advantage to them to move before the others get their act together.
Yeah, but I think it would be a suicide note for the party to go before the local elections in 2 weeks' time.
Oh no, I think they're just kind of setting up for right after. And the other thing we're not going to talk about is the Hormuz, Iran, Trump stuff, because we've covered it to death. It will still be going on next week, and we'll come back to it, no doubt. And Arthur will be covering it on Behind the Lines, and it's just incredibly important. But it's just not really worth commenting on at the moment, I think.
Our growing community of quiet writers really has had a magnificent week. We've had spirited debate on our Discord channel. We've had some superb challenges on Blue Sky and a Thursday episode main show in which our supporters contributed a topic, a guest, and a hilarious wokey dokey. So if you at home want to help us keep this podcast coming free of charge to everyone and get the opportunities to feed into how we co-create the show with them, then hop on over to ko-fi.com/quietrightpod and become a monthly supporter.
Now, the next editorial meeting is coming in a couple of weeks' time, and the next Ask Us Anything session shortly after that. So if you want invitations to those, plus access to our private Discord space, make sure you sign up today.
So, Alex, we know what we're not covering. What shall we talk about today?
Well, we can't not talk about a really significant intervention from Best for Britain on Friday. You sneak! You managed to somehow quietly assemble Neil Kinnock, Sir John Curtis, Zoe Williams, and Anand Menon in one room and launch your latest piece of work that pivots Best for Britain effectively to full fat rejoin, or I should say, join. And I have a raft of questions for you.
Well, Alex, as you well know, as do listeners, it is one topic I never ever tire of discussing. So I'll be more than happy to answer your raft. And you and I have both been, but you in particular, incensed by the BBC's latest fearless reporting, an undercover sting about wicked asylum seekers. So I'd love us both to have the chance to vent about all of that.
And finally, I think for a bit of light relief,
We'll need it.
CinemaCon in Las Vegas took place this week. They announced the newest projects taking Hollywood by storm, the year's big releases. Only it turns out that most of them are anything but new. So let's have a chat about that.
A pretty full Sunday roast plate for us. Let's tuck in.
Quiet, Riot. Leadership is not simply choosing where one wants to be and becoming annoyed that everyone is not already there too. Leadership is taking others by the hand and explaining why not only the ultimate destination is the right one, but making sure they can last the journey and the route you're choosing makes sense. This week, barely 3 days after the government adopted the position that Best for Britain has been pushing for the last 2 years, that of dynamic alignment, Naomi has pivoted the organization to full rejoin, or to describe it more accurately, since no such thing as rejoin exists, join. Neil Kinnock, I think, as so often is the case, put it best at the launch.
National and international cohesion and security requires common purpose and stable, organized alliance. As this thorough Best of Britain report demonstrates, these efforts are with the grain of public perception and aspiration. It is the rational and the patriotic approach. In the era of Trump's tariffs and tantrums, of colossal Chinese advance, of Putin's war on the West, of an intense turmoil in the Middle East, in the national interest, our special relationship has to be with our neighbors in Europe.
So, you cheeky woman, you must have been busting to tell everyone for weeks. First things first, why push for join and why do it now?
Well, this is the excellent question. We have begun doing the work over the course of the last half a year. I mean, this is not something we've cooked up in the last fortnight. It was something that we could feel the direction of travel coming towards and thought we'd get well ahead of it. So we commissioned YouGov to do 2 polls, one at the end of last year, one a couple of weeks ago, both enormous 4,500 sample polls. And it was because when we looked at what had been agreed at the summit last year between von der Leyen and Starmer, which, as everybody knows, is the agri-food deal, an energy deal, and something around youth mobility, we felt that that was probably the maximum that could be extracted under the reset banner without 2 very big things happening. So in order to get more, and the more was trailed by Rachel Reeves and the Mays lecture, we would have to pay into EU budgets very significantly, which is what caused the collapse in talks over UK access to the Defence Fund.
Yep, the safe negotiations.
And or freedom of movement, or certainly an expansion of mobility beyond that contained within the youth mobility deal, I think we will get. When you combine that with where the public is and the geopolitical situation that has so deteriorated since the summit last year, it just became so blindingly obvious to us that things were going to move and that red lines would begin to turn pink.
Mm,
Our
mm.
concern, therefore, was that people would land in the Lib Dem space of a customs union, or there's been a lot of talk from other backbenchers within Labour about either a Swiss-style deal or EFTA, EEA. And our concern was that that would not be sufficient. There wouldn't be enough of a political dividend for people making that case, because what Remainers really want is to be back in with full membership.
It also makes sense, I guess, from a campaigning organization's point of view, to not be at the same spot where the government currently is, having brought the government over to your point of view of full dynamic alignment. I guess you either pack up shop or you move in the general direction that you then want to take the government to, right?
Yeah, we are best for Britain, and we believe very firmly and always have done that Europe is best for Britain, and that we are in and of Europe and we need to be back in the beating heart of it properly as rule makers, not rule takers. And we're not the Labour Party. We're not here to be an adjunct of them or a wing of them or a faction of them. We're a totally cross-party campaign. We're patriots, okay? So our job is always, whether it's the government of today or tomorrow, there to push them in the direction that we believe is in the best interest of the country. We're not there just to have a tick box exercise and, as you say, pack up and go home. I mean, there's just simply no point in that. The point to do that will be once we are full fat members of the European Union.
It sounds from what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you always did envisage this pivot coming down the line, but that the madness emanating from the White House has compressed the timetable. It has created both a sense of urgency and the political space to move on this.
Without question, the biggest advocate I have is Donald Trump. He has done more for my cause than any person who has put their head above the parapet from the world of celebrity, from the world of politics, from diplomacy. He could not have turned the British people away from America more. We saw that in different polling we did last year, that within a year of his second presidency, support for trade with the USA had collapsed completely in favour of much closer trade links with the EU. And I think people are just realising that Trump was not an aberration. They went back for him a second time. A nationalistic, protectionist president in the White House could easily happen again. If he dies in office, we get J.D. Vance, for goodness sake. We may well get a Democratic president before the next general election here in the UK, but there's nothing to say that they would be significantly less protectionist, or that the country wouldn't go back for a Republican president again who would have a similarly dim view of supporting European security and defence and free trade. So all of those factors combined has, as you pointed out, accelerated the pro-European cause in the UK.
What about the sort of internal politics of this? Do you get the sense that Labour MPs, I know that the bulk of Labour MPs are leaning in this direction ideologically, but do you think they have tipped over the point of being afraid they may lose their seat if they move on Europe, to knowing they will definitely lose their seat if they don't move on Europe?
Well, let's have a little listen to what John Curtis said at our launch, because I think he puts it incredibly well.
The truth is, if you look now at the polling data, yes, Labour are losing 1 in 10 of their 2024 voters to reform, and they are predominantly people who voted Leave in 2016. But Labour are losing something like 1 in 4 of their supporters to the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, and they are overwhelmingly pro-Remain supporters. Labour support has gone down more heavily amongst Remain supporters than it has amongst Leave supporters. The thing that Labour MPs have to wrap their minds around is this, and I know it's difficult. Yes, at the moment, it is true that Reform are much more likely to take seats off Labour than are the Greens. But the reason why Reform are capable of taking Labour seats is because Labour are losing votes to the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. And you have to wrap your mind around the fact that the party to which you might lose a seat is not necessarily the party that's taking votes off you.
So what John has very beautifully pointed out, and as many pollsters have been making the point over the course of the last year, Reform will win seats from Labour, not because they are winning Labour voters, but because Labour is losing so many voters to the Greens and the Lib Dems and the SNP and to Plaid Cymru and to independents in certain seats that allows Reform to take the seat under our first past the post system. Labour MPs get this. The penny has dropped on that front, certainly. Now, don't get me wrong, you've still got blue Labour factions that have a left-wing Brexit bent to their ideology. It is not plain sailing. And it has taken a long time for some members of the cabinet to come around to our way of thinking, but the Treasury certainly pivoted very hard last year. If this government needs one thing, it is growth. And there is no other lever they can pull that will get them the kind of growth they need to do everything on their wish list and make people feel the benefit of their government than reaching for the European Union button. What is also very, very clear in our report, and we'll leave a link in the show notes so that everyone can go and have a look at it. And I would advise you to click at the top of the link where you get the slides that we presented at the launch too. The political dividend comes from the left bloc being given what they really want. So at the moment, when you ask people, what do you think of the government's current negotiating position within Europe? Well, okay, you get the broadest level of support for that. But it is very concentrated in somewhat support rather than strongly support, which means people are holding their nose. They don't love it, but they know it's better than what we've got. When you then ask them, how do you feel about rejoin? You get this big increase in strong support. But of course, you also get on the Leave side, the Reform bloc side, an increase in strongly against. But what happens with customs union and single market is that the people who are holding their nose for the government's current position continue to hold their nose, and you get a drop-off in support from Reform and Conservative voters, but still with 40% of Conservative voters being prepared to back rejoin and over 20% of Reform voters. And then they trundle along with that level of support for any option that goes further towards pink lines than the government's current red line position. But you also don't get any change in those holding their nose because they actually want rejoin. And it's only when you get to offering rejoin that the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Labour voters, the SNP voters, the Plaid Cymru voters suddenly breathe a sigh of relief and go, yes, please. So the political dividend comes from being able to unite that pro-European bloc behind this issue, given that Farage has very successfully rebuilt the Eurosceptic bloc behind him with one party. And what you need is to galvanise and give a reason to tactical voters to say, okay, maybe I will back parties that are coming out for rejoin, even though they might not be my first preference in the constituency I'm in. I know that I need to hold my nose and vote for them. And they will do that if it is a full fat membership option.
I have to say, I found that graphic the most eye-catching of the entire presentation, because there are only two things that command a sort of majority support, and that's the current position of full rejoin. And it is interesting to see that line move from meh, I can put up with it, it's okay, I suppose, to yes, please. Even though the total support is marginally lower for full joining of the European Union, it is a hell of a lot more enthusiastic.
And it's still over the 50% line.
Yeah, and that enthusiasm makes a difference when it comes to elections, doesn't it? It's that enthusiasm that becomes energy.
It does. And the other thing to point out is that when we looked at the customs union and single market option, what you see is that people who are holding their nose continue to hold their nose, and you get a very large increase in don't know. Now, some people would argue, well, that's a good thing. You know, they don't really care. They'll let it happen. Not true. We don't think. When we analyse the cross breaks of who is captured in the don't know columns, they are predominantly right-leaning. So they are Conservative and Reform voters saying they don't know. Why does that matter? Well, because when we look at all of the options on the table that go closer to Europe, so not the Farage position of taking us out of the ECHR and then the Boris Johnson deal collapsing completely and effectively ending up with a no-deal Brexit. When we move towards anything that looks closer, you're looking at a long and protracted negotiation period. It will take a long time to negotiate customs union. It would take a long time to negotiate access to the single market. But both of those break down because you've got sovereignty issues rising rapidly there. Under a customs union, you're going to be outsourcing your trade policy to the EU. If you go to a situation where you have freedom of movement within the single market, you are then also having the oversight of the EFTA Court, European Court of Justice. And again, those right-wing people sat and don't know, I don't think stay don't know. I think they move to anti.
Well, because they are naturally more open to hearing the argument of the other side.
Of course they are.
So I
Of course
think,
they are.
you can assume that more of them will move in that direction.
And what we found when we did focus groups, because the report we put out was not simply quantitative analysis, we've done a lot of focus groups over the last year or so. When people are asked, okay, how would you feel about a European court having the final say, the arbitration, the referee, if you like, the referee role, and that occasionally those referees would be British because you would have a British judge or judges sat on them, all of a sudden they get it and they're like, oh, okay, no, that's fine. When England play Germany, we don't care if the referee is Spanish. It's something that they can be persuaded by. So we think that even as stepping stones, the customs union and single market are not sustainable policy options that would survive a long negotiation process, whereas rejoin does. It gets you that political dividend. And most importantly, of course, it gets you the most economic growth. And we do know that incumbent governments the world over are struggling when their voters do not feel better off.
Quiet Riot. Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm.
Quiet Riot. Look, I'm less expert in this than you or the people you had on, but it does occur to me that the less explaining you have to do, the stronger your position. And I think that is surely one of the strongest elements. You would have to do almost no explaining. Everyone remembers the amount of paperwork they had to do as a business when we were in, how easy it was to travel, all of those things. If you start talking about a kind of customs union and a kind of single market-ish membership through EFTA, whatever, you're going into having to do a hell of a lot of explaining, which is never helpful campaigning-wise. So I think clarity is an advantage in this case.
Yeah.
Now, as I have been saying for, a decade now, this is not something that can be decided unilaterally. So Best for Britain has also been rolling the pitch Brussels side. On Thursday, you were there for an EU-UK forum at which Nick Thomas-Symonds and Maros Šefčovič spoke. I presume you chatted in the corridors and took the temperature. What are your impressions?
You're dead right. All of the interesting stuff happens in the breakout area over coffee and over drinks and things like that, rather than in the main hall of any event. The mood has shifted very markedly. And again, I would point to Trump for very much helping with that. You've also got countries like Iceland that are having a referendum next week. In fact, you've got a bunch of countries lined up in the accession process. So the EU knows that it is going to be expanding from 27 countries to 30 plus within the course of the next few years. So they're sort of having live and active discussions about growing. And it would be a huge boost to them if the Brits were to decide that actually joining is in their best interests and those of Europe. And Europe knows it too. Our mutual security and defense relies on it. And security is the big thing that comes up time and time again when you're in an EU member state having these kinds of conversations, or indeed in Brussels. The threats to NATO to pulling out of underpinning European security have been heard loud and clear. And I think that we will get a very warm reception, a tough one, of course. They are very tough negotiators, and all of that would be played out over the course of any accession period for the UK. But I have been very, very struck by how warmly received our pre-briefings that we were doing with people on this side of the channel and the other side were ahead of our launch. And I think that they are very welcoming of this timely intervention.
Now, during the launch, Neil Kinnock spoke about, I think quite touchingly actually, about the need to make not just an economic argument this time, but also a principled, sort of values-based, emotional even case for joining. How do we do that?
Yeah, no, he's of course very, very right. And we do need to just talk about the mood music as being critical, particularly for European ears. They need to hear that we feel it, that we feel European, that we now really get it, having suffered a second Trump presidency. Our alignment, our values, our outlook, our philosophical approach, and of course, our defense of international liberal democracy tethers us much more closely to Europe than it does to Washington. But I think where Neil is partly right and partly wrong, partly right that of course we need to learn the lessons of 2016 when, frankly, Cameron and Osborne couldn't have ballsed it up more if they'd tried, and just went so hard on the economic argument that people didn't grasp it and did almost nothing, with the honourable exception of Gordon Brown, who did very, very good stuff walking through the ruins of Coventry Cathedral to make that emotional case about the peace project, about the wonder of the Union. However, we've got different audiences to talk to, and any good campaigner will tell you, you tailor your message. There are a significant number of Cameronite voters left in the country that are showing up in the Westminster voting intention block for the Conservatives, despite Kemi Badenoch saying, you know, I'm going after the Reform voters. I don't really care about you lot that are stuck with us and are quite pro-European. I'm going to go fishing over in Farish's block for voters. And they do respond very well to the economic message. So it's not going to be a binary case of really don't get the economic message. And of course, because we're not where we were sadly in 2014, 2015, 2016 economically, the cost of living crisis has hit us extremely hard because of Brexit, because of Ukraine, because of the war in Iran. And we haven't even begun to feel the inflation that's headed our way as a consequence, even of the time that the Strait of Hormuz was closed before this weekend's impasse on that front. So there are economic arguments to make for certain audiences, and there are emotional ones to be made elsewhere. I think they are now easier to make, A, because we've learned the lessons of 2016, and B, because, as I've said a couple of times already, Trump has really made Brits feel more European.
Yeah, it's really sharpened that sense of where do we belong. I don't think anyone is saying to make the economic argument. I think the fear is that a sort of expert class takes over the campaign and makes the economic argument for other people who understand economics, instead of a sort of grassroots campaign that makes the economic argument people to people. This is what this means for your supermarket bill, rather than if we do X doppelganger analysis, then the percentage would be 1.5 instead of 1%. That's the trap, and that's the one we have to avoid. As a campaigning individual myself, I know you're planning to listen to the second part of the Europa Policy episode this weekend. You won't be surprised to know that I have moved further still, having looked at the issue. Well, I now think a European Union is not enough. I think we should be broadening our horizons to areas in North Africa, Asia Minor, Canada, other people who want to join us in terms of like associate membership almost, and that the core of it should be going in a more federalist direction, in a kind of full union direction. But that's an argument for another day. Like I said, as everything moves, we move with it.
I agree. I think the next campaign is to make the euro the reserve currency.
I'm surprised that's not being talked about already. I mean, it was the main benefit, the main tit for tat that America got for its disproportionate contribution into NATO. And they're, if they're now dropping out of their side of the bargain, I don't see why we should persist with it. Yeah. One last question. I mean, it's a difficult time for those who claimed you were some sort of sleeper agent traitor for not jumping to rejoin when they wanted you to and when it would have been ignored. So how satisfying is it personally to be able to argue like full-throatedly for the thing you have always believed is the future, but had to step very gingerly around?
Well, it's wonderful. I'm not a Europhile, I'm a Euromaniac. I was a Romaniac and I will be a Rejoiniac. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and I witnessed firsthand multilateral solution to ending decades of bloodshed there. And it was only when Washington, Dublin, Belfast, Westminster and Brussels all worked together in the same direction that we delivered peace. And the European Union, to my mind, is unquestionably the greatest peace project in human history. And to be able to push on an open door again, both here and in the EU member states and Brussels, to be able to say the time is right. We now need to talk very seriously about how to get the UK back into full membership is a relief, exciting, liberating, and true to my cockles that are being warmed.
Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
In a week when the world was contending with active conflict in Ukraine, in the Middle East, an accelerating standoff between the USA and Iran, a looming energy crisis in the UK, and a shrinking window for diplomatic intervention on multiple fronts, our national broadcaster, the BBC, made a striking editorial choice. It pinned a story about fraudulent asylum claims, specifically migrants allegedly coached to fake being gay, at the very top of its homepage. Not once, but repeatedly.
We're investigating immigration advisors that are encouraging migrants to cheat the asylum system.
To penetrate this shadow industry, we've had to go undercover. Our reporter is posing as a former student who wants to stay in the UK. They're not being persecuted, they've got no genuine basis to claim asylum.
But we've heard some consultants are prepared to help migrants like him pretend to be gay to stay in the UK.
So in this section, we're going to ask a very simple question of BBC News. Why? Why choose it and why elevate it?
I have strong feelings about this for several reasons as, as a gay migrant. And I want to get your unvarnished view before I risk tainting it. So if the BBC were here, they would say it is of public interest, it is accurate, it's a story, so what's your problem?
The decision to elevate this story to the status of lead news, displacing coverage of war, of blockades, and existential economic threat, does demand scrutiny. And I don't believe it was an accident of the news cycle. I think it was a choice, and I think it was made deliberately by editors. And editors who knew precisely what they were doing and what it would generate for them. Now, the story itself, whatever its journalistic merit as a piece of investigative reporting, to my mind operated like a lit match in a room of accelerant, because it simultaneously activates anti-immigration anxiety and suspicion towards the LGBT community and very specifically LGBT asylum seekers, including the many whose claims are entirely genuine. They will face persecution if they go back to their home country, where homosexuality is not just outlawed, but punishable by some pretty awful means. And by framing Pakistani and Bengali migrants as central actors in a systemic fraud, and by making a support group for gay and lesbian asylum seekers the focal point of all of their framing, the BBC did not merely report a story. They handed ready-made narratives to those who question the legitimacy of asylum claims based on anything but particularly sexual orientation, and those who just distrust immigration in the broadest sense. And the collateral damage to real gay refugees, to community organizations that support them, and to the possibility of fair public debate was, to my mind, not even vaguely incidental. It was foreseeable. It was ignored. And what makes me question institutional honesty here rather than editorial judgment is how they persisted in placing it. You can run it once and claim it was a difficult, investigation, and that might be defensible, but they chose to keep it pinned at the top of that homepage and return to it and amplified it while all these other awful, horrendous situations were happening across the world, and they competed for the same bit of news real estate. And that tells you something about what the BBC's homepage has actually become, this metric optimization engine dressed up as a public broadcaster. So I'm really cross about it, and I think you are too.
Yeah, all the things you mentioned are absolutely right. I would go back even further to the commissioning stage.
Right.
Like, no one is disputing that there is some fraud in every system. Whenever you create a system of rules, there will be people who will try to game it for their own benefit. The question is, in an environment where the narrative that every refugee, every asylum seeker is not a real refugee, is not a real asylum seeker, in an environment where LGBT rights are being pushed back on in a very real way, why choose that investigation? It's not something that anyone is disputing. If you go out to find some fraud in the benefit system, even though it's a minute amount, if you go out literally intending to find it, you will find it.
Of course.
But what narratives are you amplifying and justifying by doing that? So I would question even the earlier decision at the commissioning stage to say, yes, don't devote your resources and journalistic brilliance to investigating tax avoidance or the ways in which Russia interferes in our political process. Devote them to really nailing those fake gays.
Yep, exactly.
And there is something just really dark and unsavory in that.
Do you think they would have carried out any pre-publication assessment of the likely impact of the framing on the genuine LGBT asylum seekers? Like, what could that assessment conclude, other than, of course, it will also hurt them?
I really don't know that they care enough. I really don't know that they have the resources to do that. I really don't know that they haven't been swallowed up in simply competing for clicks and have abandoned effectively their public broadcaster mission where news is concerned. I don't know any of those things. I used to know those things. I used to defend the BBC with every breath I had in my being. But over the last 10 years, I have increasingly began to question whether actually it has lost its status as a public institution and has now become just a collection of ambitious individuals looking to elbow their way to the top. I don't know the answer to that anymore. I can't say with any confidence what it is. I know that it contains huge numbers of very talented and very ethical individuals whose heart is in the right place and whose ethics are absolutely correct. I would even venture a guess that they are the vast majority, but it's all for naught. If it seeks the rewards it seeks, noise and clicks, their days there are numbered, because once you go down this path, it only ends in one destination, in one direction. You don't get back. Once you start to chase sensationalism and clicks, it's very difficult to grab that back, because the next person that's running the website division will be asked, why are you getting fewer clicks? than your predecessor. We want more clicks.
And it's happening in the week that the BBC made a very sudden announcement that they're cutting 2,000 jobs.
Yeah.
So that lends even more motivation to your point about, okay, well, I'm going to be hauled up and asked why nobody read my piece.
Yeah.
I've got to make it as clickbaity as possible. I've got to drive traffic, or I'm going to be on that list of 2,000.
The other thing I would add is, again, this point I make over and over, and will keep making over and over. Immigrants' lives, and that includes refugees and asylum seekers, are not linear. When there is a system that you can either navigate successfully and open a door to a new and better life, or not navigate successfully with the opposite result, and you employ advisors and consultants and lawyers to tell you how to navigate this system, there will be ways that make it easier and ways that make it harder. So what I don't know from watching that documentary is whether, the woman from Pakistan being advised to say she's a lesbian and being coached to make that convincing is terrified to go back because she will be forced into an abusive marriage because her family have sold her. And it's just much easier to say, I'm a lesbian. And so I don't even know whether in a system that makes some categories easier to prove than others, whether these people are not genuine asylum seekers. They may well be genuine asylum seekers for reasons which are hard to prove. And so they get someone saying, look, why don't you do this? Because it's easier to prove. And that's the aspect that isn't investigated at all, really, in the documentary. And they keep issuing those caveats saying most asylum seekers are successful, most asylum seekers succeed on appeal, most asylum seekers are completely genuine.
But most people only read the fucking headline.
Well, exactly. And if you have to issue this series of caveats to counteract the massive visual gift you are giving really to the far right, then don't do it.
And
Is
this
the
is not an
answer.
isolated case, Alex, is it? We and other critics have pointed to what is now quite clearly a pattern of BBC News giving disproportionate homepage prominence to immigration and asylum stories that carry that high emotional charge. We've got a new Director General inbound in the form of Matt Britton. Do you think he would carry out an internal review of whether the homepage choices on this category of story are consistent with their stated commitment to impartiality?
I mean, I hope so. Like I said, I think what is needed is not getting lost in the weeds of technicalities, but some really profound soul searching. It's entirely obvious to me. Like, I don't know when you last watched Newsnight. If you watch someone like Victoria Derbyshire, I mean, you can see her morale is low. Her soul departs her body every time she has to interview some Republican asshole that will argue that, well, yes, the Pope is wrong about his interpretation of religious dogma for balance. You can kind of see all of them just shriveling from embarrassment in what the news division has become. And so I just think if you want to save the BBC, well, the very first step to that is you have to make it worth saving. And they all have to sit down and do a little bit of soul searching and ask, what is our mission? What are we trying to do in this organization? Is it to get clicks? Is it to eventually transition to a company where we have our own podcast from which we make millions? Or is it to give a balanced and fair spread of what is going on in the country? Because I don't think it's doing that at the moment. And it's very disheartening.
Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Now, CinemaCon, the show west of Old, renamed in 2011, is the annual convention of cinema owners. So every year, big studios line up to show Ankle. It is the trade event for anyone interested in bona fide blockbusters. Release dates tend to be announced, first glimpse trailers screened, and big future projects teased. This year was no exception, with a new phase of the Avengers films finally releasing a trailer and Chris Nolan showing some pretty chunky footage from his upcoming Odyssey, especially the Trojan horse bit. But it was difficult not to notice the lack of original stories. Sequels, prequels, franchises, and remakes have made up the bulk of where big studio budgets go. Have all the stories been told? So, starting with the good, and accepting that our chosen genre, horror, tends to get less of a spotlight at these events since it has so many dedicated annual meets, I guess. Did anything really tickle you, Naomi?
Well, two did actually. The first being as a child of the 1980s, I find Tom Cruise a difficult creature. However, I am a Top Gun gal through and through. And I actually really enjoyed the last big Top Gun film. I think that was 2022. I'm not generally one for enjoying a big blockbuster movie at the cinema that is 3 hours long. That one flew by, and I genuinely found it very, very entertaining. And I am looking forward to the next one. But one that's more up my genre street is, of course, the Dune franchise. Huge, huge, huge fan of the books and the original film. And of course, what is not to love when you've got Chalamet and Zendaya, and what is being billed for part 3 is actually something a lot more action-packed and faster-paced and emotional. The first two have been quite tomey, long, slow scenes and, beautiful landscape, etc.
And a lot darker, I think.
Yeah, I hope so.
If it goes by what the books have in them.
Exactly.
Really, it's when he becomes a pretty unmitigated ass.
Yeah.
Let's have a little listen.
If we have a girl, what will we name her?
Her name should be Ganima. She would need to be strong, like her mother. What if it's a boy?
I would name him Leto. So he would have the wisdom of his grandfather.
Your father never started a war.
How about you, Alex? What's whet your appetite most?
Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm very excited about Avengers Doomsday.
Is it the word doomsday that hooked
Very, very excited about Avengers Doomsday. Let's have a little listen to the trailer that's just been released.
Death comes for us all. That's all I know for sure. The question isn't, are you prepared to die? The question is, who will you be when you close your eyes?
The reason I'm excited about it is because it brings in quite a lot of elements that have tended to stay separate in the Marvel universe. So you get Patrick Stewart's Professor X making a return and mingling with the Fantastic Four, which I think has been a really great reboot and brilliantly acted. And you get the return of Robert Downey Jr., but now as the villain. And you get the people who have been in the periphery of the previous iterations of the universe are now taking center stage. I'm dead excited.
I can't wait
by
either.
it. I really am very excited by it.
And I actually prefer a sequel and a prequel and all of that to a remake. Remakes of great films have almost always disappointed me. I really was not a fan of the Gary Oldman, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy because I'm a huge Alec Guinness fan, and I think that series was just so superb that to remake it as a film, you had to do something different with it. And I don't think Gary Oldman did. I think he did a very good impression of Alec Guinness. We know how wonderful he can be in things like Slow Horses, bring him his own bent to a character. And then, of course, you've got things like the Nicolas Cage Wicker Man come off it.
Oh.
1998, Psycho, awful. 2014, RoboCop, atrocious. I could go on. So I'm much more excited about prequels and sequels than I ever am about straight up remakes.
And they're remaking the Thomas Crown affair. Like, why?
Why?
It's already been remade once relatively recently and relatively successfully, I guess, with Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. It still didn't come close to the original. But it's just a heist story. Write a different heist story. Why remake the Thomas Crown affair? I guess they want the audience that is curious about how they're going to do things differently. But I just don't get it.
Honourable exception to the John Carpenter version of The Thing, 1982, which was a remake of the 1951 Thing from Another World. And that was a much better movie in 1982. So there are exceptions that prove my rule.
Of course there are exceptions. And a very different movie to the one from the 50s.
Well, come on. Look, you have a very brilliant podcast called Podyssey. Are you looking forward to Odyssey, or are you mildly dreading it because you're meant to love it and because you know so much about it now, even more than you would have done 2 years ago?
No, I'm looking forward to it. I like the director and the talent involved. I would be concerned if James Cameron was remaking it, or Bruckheimer, or you know what I mean, one of the big, whoa, cars and babes directors. But I like Christopher Nolan. The cast and creatives that he's involved are incredibly talented. So maybe it will be a very good thing.
I'm always a bit worried when I see an all-star cast lineup that they've blown all the budget on the cast and they don't leave enough for story development and set and all of that.
Oh, I don't know. I love an all-star cast. I love those.
Really?
I love those Agatha Christie, Death on the Nile, Murder on the Orient Express. Like, those are the sort of films that I'm very happy for them to be remade in every generation, because it's basically about the parade of A-listers that you can get on that train. And so I'm okay with that. The story of the Odyssey is, as Christopher Nolan says, it's not a story, it's the story. It deserves to be retold, and it belongs to everyone. It began as oral tradition. It literally belongs to the people. And so as long as they approach it with a lot of love, not respect, I like films that are irreverent to their source material, actually, because I think what works as a film is very different to what works as an epic poem, obviously. A great example of that is The Name of the Rose. The original book is all about the analysis and the semiology and the internal monologue and the detail. The film with Sean Connery and Christian Slater, I think it was, with a fantastic turn by Ron Perlman. That was my first encounter of Ron Perlman. And I genuinely thought he was an Italian person with disabilities, and was very surprised when I saw him in another film later. The film wouldn't work as a faithful telling of the book. And it worked really well as a sort of whodunit. And so I'm very happy for people to be irreverent, as long as they are very, very loving. You really have to have love for the material, not love for how much money it can make in the box office. I seem to have access to a lot more films and a much broader range of films than I have ever had. I guess what Hollywood is trying to do is really get people into those cinema seats. They're trying with IMAX and with 4DX and with 3D, and trying to find experiences that you can't really replicate at home. And so I think it's working all right at the moment. It's not like it was 20, 25 years ago, where you felt like the big budget projects were sucking the oxygen out from the indie space and nothing else was getting made. It now feels like there's a lot of stuff getting made. What's the most genuinely fresh, original screenplay that you've seen in the last few years?
It is a Scott Beck and Brian Woods film from 2024 called Heretic that has Hugh
with Hugh
Grant in it.
yeah.
You are you not monotheist?
We believe in Heavenly Father, yes.
Okay. There are three major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I call them the big three.
So it's a two-hander set, almost entirely one-room shot. And obviously you've got Hugh Grant, and he's playing this quietly terrifying intellectual predator. So it's about information, about manipulation, and about the weaponization of rationalism. So I'm not going to do any spoilers, but Hugh Grant plays the man who invites two young Mormon missionaries, women, into his home. And then he just simply talks to them, and that's it. That's the film. And what makes it extraordinary is Hugh Grant's character. He's not a ranting villain. He is the man who has clearly read everything, thought carefully, and he like arrives at this worldview that is really seductive but monstrous. So it's got all of the age-old psychological thriller things you want. Stranger traps you in their house, but then he fills it entirely with ideas rather than jump scares. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very good, and I was very unsettled by it in a way that I thought I wouldn't be.
I agree. I really enjoyed Heretic in a way that was probably quite surprising. And it was all the things that you said, and also had some genuinely thought-provoking stuff to say about religion.
Oh, which, very much so. Yeah.
I haven't really come across since maybe The Exorcist.
Yeah,
actually, the last film I saw that was genuinely creepy and frightening, but also had actually a really chunky philosophical debate at its heart. For me, and I don't know if you've seen either of these, if you haven't, I recommend them both very, very highly. So I will choose two. The first one is Anatomy of a Fall. It's a French film by Justine Triet from 2023 with a brilliant central performance by Sandra Hüller. And it's all about a woman in a cabin isolated with her child who is visually impaired and her husband. And the relationship is obviously going down the drain. And at some point, the husband basically falls from the balcony and dies. At the beginning, everyone thinks that he killed himself. But then there is an inquest and things begin to emerge because actually it turns out that he was quite afraid that she was planning to off him. And it's basically courtroom-based, but does a lot of really beautifully shot flashbacks to that mountain, because they're in a cabin in a completely isolated mountain retreat. And I think the most extraordinary thing is that the key witness, of course, is this boy that can't see. And so you're relying only on what he's heard. It tells the story in a way that I have not seen a story told before. It's a genuinely new way to structure a thing. Brilliant. So I would highly recommend it. And then the second one is slightly more popcorny, but no less enjoyable for that. It's a film called Companion by Drew Hancock, 2025.
That came out last year.
Yeah, 2025. Yeah. It's on Now TV if you have it, but both of them, you can kind of rent them from Amazon or the Sky service or Apple or whatever. So you can watch both of them for a reasonable rental price with Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid. Jack Quaid is the young guy from The Boys. And it's all about a man basically who has an AI sex bot as a girlfriend that turns against him. It's a black comedy horror. It's incredibly gory, so you will love it. But also it's very, very darkly funny. And it does that thing that movies I love do. It wears the genre as a kind of sheep's clothing. So it is ostensibly about anxiety about AI and all of that, technology turning against us. But really it is about sexual politics. Really it is about the fact that he has designed this woman to be a particular way that he thought he would love. And it turns out the way he has designed her, she doesn't love him.
Oh, every good horror film has got to come with teeth.
Honestly, it's very, very good. And again, highly recommended.
It is now firmly on my list.
So on that rather cinematic note, it is time to shout, cut! For another Sunday. Thank you for continuing to make us part of your weekend routine.
We will be back, of course, on Thursday in the shape of our regular threesome with Kenny. And if you can help us keep the lights on, you can do it at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod.
Enjoy the rest of your day and keep on quietly writing. We love you more than Thor loves his hammer. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
And that is what unlocks the story. And it's told in a, fucking bike. Yes, well done. You have a tiny penis.